Good morning. Again, it's really good to see everybody here this morning. You may have noticed on the bulletin the title to the sermon this morning, "The Worth of a Sparrow." Worth of a Sparrow. If you would, let's turn to Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10. As I began to contemplate this and to begin to look, I decided that I would try to figure out just exactly how much a sparrow was worth. So I got online. Of course, that's the thing to do, right? You get online to find something if you want to see if you can buy something. And I started searching to see if I could buy a sparrow. I couldn't find a sparrow anywhere. I found one that I thought possibly might be. It looked like it was, but when I went on, the site was gone. It was no longer there. You simply couldn't buy a sparrow. You know, if you look at the idea of supply and demand and how that drives prices up and that type of thing, evidently there's not a lot of demand for sparrows because you can't get them. I asked a guy in a gas station, a convenience store, just the other day, how come he didn't carry Rain-X? And he said, I can't move enough of it. I can't sell it. He said, it's a great product, but I can't sell it. And so he doesn't keep it. Well, that's because he's in that business to make money. And so if he can't sell it, he's not going to keep it. Well, you must not be able to sell sparrows because you can't find them, at least on the internet, you can't find them anywhere. Wonder why that is. I mean, to us, evidently sparrows aren't worth very much. I was amazed in looking on the internet, looking for sparrows, at some of the things that I saw. You know, I was raised, and most of you know this, I was raised hunting. I love to hunt. I still love to hunt. But I was raised, if you're going to shoot something, you're going to eat it. You know, you don't just shoot something for no reason. I was amazed at how many people made comments of things such as, you know, their dad gave them a BB gun, and they learned with their BB gun by shooting sparrows. You know, killing sparrows for no reason at all except for target practice. That just didn't make any sense to me, that you don't kill something needlessly. But it just kind of goes to show you kind of what we think about sparrows. I remember a school teacher that I had that had a sparrow trap. Anybody have a sparrow trap? You can get those online. I found those really quick. You can get a sparrow trap because so many people don't like sparrows. They come and they eat up all the bird feed that you put out for all the pretty little birds that come. But here are these sparrows that aren't that spectacular to look at. They don't have a really pretty song. They could this little chirp, chirp, chirp to them, but there's really not a really pretty song. And a lot of people trap sparrows. Now, I know what my school teacher did with them after he trapped them, and it's probably a good thing he didn't get caught, but I don't know what other people do, but you can buy sparrow traps. I mean, they're made where you put the food on top and they all gather on there, and after so many of them get on there, it goes bloop, and they're down in the cage. Sparrow traps. We don't put a lot of worth on sparrows, not even as much, it seems, as what we're going to read here. Is what these people did. Matthew chapter 10, beginning in verse 24. Jesus says, the disciple is not above his teacher, nor a slave above his master. It is enough for the disciple that he become as his teacher and the slave as his master. If they called the head of the house Beelzebub, how much more the members of the household? Therefore, do not fear them, for there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in the darkness, speak in the light, and what you hear whispered in your ear, proclaim upon the housetops. And do not fear those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a cent? I mean, yours may say copper coin. There's different translations there. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a cent, and yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father? But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Therefore do not fear. You are of more value than many sparrows. Everyone, therefore, who shall confess me before men, I will confess him before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever shall deny me before men, I will also deny him before my Father who is in heaven. You know, it's interesting the context that we see this, and we're familiar with the song "His Eye is on the Sparrow." How many remember that song? Okay, most everybody. I didn't know that it would be that familiar to that many people. We probably should have sang it this morning. But why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart be lonely and long for heaven and home? When Jesus is my portion, my constant friend is he. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free, for his eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. In this passage, and we get that from here. I mean, this is the idea of if he's aware of the sparrows. But when we really look at the context, it's also interesting to see he's talking about fear here. The whole context of this, if we would have started up at verse 16, and I want you to do that with me. Let's start up in verse 16 because he's telling these disciples that it's not going to be easy. He says in verse 16, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, therefore be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves." I'm sending you like sheep out in the midst of wolves. Now, back when I had sheep, if I thought there was a coyote out there in the field, I was out there, I was shining the spotlight, I was looking. I didn't want my sheep out there with coyotes out there. I wanted to do what I could to get the coyotes to go away. Jesus says, I'm sending you like sheep out in the midst of wolves. I want you to understand this. Therefore be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves. But beware of men, for they will deliver you up to the courts and scourge you in their synagogues. And you shall even be brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, do not become anxious about about how or what you will speak. For it shall be given to you in that hour what you are to speak. For it is not you who speak, but it is the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you. And brother will deliver up brother to death, and father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. Folks, this doesn't sound good. He's saying you're going to betray each other. There's going to be fathers that are going to deliver their children up to the courts, to those who are putting them to the death. Brother against brother. Verse 22, and you will be hated by all on account of my name. But it is the one who has endured to the end who will be saved. But whenever they persecute you in this city, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you shall not finish going through the cities of Israel until the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a slave above his master. Jesus is saying, if they're doing it to me, if they're going to do it to me, they're going to do it to you too. And so he says in verse 26 again, therefore do not fear them, for there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in the darkness. When do you listen the best? In the darkness? We do. We listen well. I'm not sure if it's because there's less distraction, if there's just other things that don't catch our attention, but if somebody starts talking in the darkness, you listen. Jesus says, what I tell you in the darkness, you proclaim. You proclaim even in the light. What I'm whispering in your ear, you proclaim upon the housetops. Do not fear those who can kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul, but rather fear him who's able to destroy both the soul and the body in hell. This can be a crippling fear. For these people that Jesus is talking to, these disciples that he's going to send directly out to proclaim about him and the gospel, the salvation for mankind that others weren't wanting to hear. Not only were they not wanting to hear it, they were wanting to destroy anybody that was preaching it, anybody that was saying this, because of what it was going to do to their lives, because they were simply against it, or because, even as Jesus said, they were of their father the devil. He wants to stop it. And he's telling them, don't fear. In the midst of that, if we have the idea that family members are going to betray us, if we have the idea that people are going to persecute us in this fashion, we would have a reason to fear. But don't we find ourselves fearing not necessarily because we're enduring some of these physical things, but because we're just simply afraid of the unknown. We're afraid of what to expect. We're afraid of how people will react, whether they're going to approve of us or disapprove of us. In 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 4, it says they're going to think it strange, or they're going to think it odd about us if we are living the life of Christ. Not even just saying it, if we're living the life of Christ, so much that they're going to want to tear it down. So it's really not the unknown. I mean, we know that people are going to reject that. It's going to make them uncomfortable. We don't want people to be uncomfortable around us, do we? Not really. You kind of want people to like us. How many want people to like you? We want people to like us. But you know, living as Christ, at times it's going to make people uncomfortable, and they're not going to want to be around us. That's what Peter was saying over there in chapter 4 of 1 Peter. When we recognize that, sometimes then we change our behavior. Yeah, I'm a Christian. Don't worry, I'm not going to do anything that offends you. Jesus was an offense, was he not? A stumbling block? Even the message of him is an offense to many. Fear. Let me read you this. During his years as premier of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev denounced many of the policies and atrocities of Joseph Stalin. Some of you remember that better than others. Once, as he censored Stalin in a public meeting, Khrushchev was interrupted by a shout from a heckler in the audience. "You were one of Stalin's colleagues. Why didn't you stop him?" "Who said that?" roared Khrushchev. An agonizing silence followed as nobody in the room dared move a muscle. Then Khrushchev replied quietly, "Now you know why." The point was taken. Fear. Fear can cause us to say nothing. It's not always what we say that's wrong, but fear can cause us to say nothing. Jesus says, don't fear. Don't be afraid. Yes, this is coming for you. Yes, you're going to experience this. Don't be afraid. You can buy 2 sparrows for a little copper coin. And yet God knows when each one of them falls. He knows about the sparrows. I mean, what are they worth? I mean, to them, and it's interesting, different societies making pets out of different things. Evidently, the early Romans, even probably during this time, or otherwise they wouldn't be selling them. But the early Romans kept sparrows. It's interesting, in Guyana, there were these little birds that really, they weren't that spectacular in their song, were they, Rachel? Bobby had one. Our son Bobby had one. But the reason they kept these little bitty birds was because they would bet on them. You'd see guys, grown men, going down the street carrying this little cage with this little bitty bird in there, and they would set these birds together. And I'm not sure all the time what they were betting on, but they would bet on these birds. On, I guess, when they would sing or how long they would sing or some of that kind of stuff. Never really got in on that part of it. But for some reason, there was a time when people would keep sparrows. But they were still almost worthless. But not to God. As worthless as we would consider them, God knows when each one falls. That's simply remarkable. I mean, he says, even the hairs of your head are numbered. I mean, I have to realize God's work is getting easier for me. Some of you laugh, you know. But recognizing God's knowledge of those things, I mean, you know, when you're a younger guy, hair's pretty important. You want to have all your hair and all that. After a while, it's not near as important anymore. But to God, for some reason, it is. It's really illustrating how important his creation is to him, but even more so, we, as the crown glory of his creation, how important we are to him. Don't be afraid. If God knows when something that you consider pretty worthless falls to the ground, then he knows about you. He's going to be able to provide for you. So don't fear. In Psalm 102, there's a verse there that says, I feel like, and it's one of the, let's just turn over there. We've got time. Psalm 102. This psalm comes from the perspective of somebody who is going through something and we don't know exactly what they're afflicted with, what is happening in their life. But he says in verse 1, Hear my prayer, O Lord, and let my cry for help come to thee. Do not hide thy face from me in the day of my distress. Incline thine ear to me in the day when I call, answer me quickly. For my days have been consumed in smoke, and my bones have been scorched like a hearth. My heart has been smitten like grass and has withered away. Indeed, I forget to eat my bread. Because of the loudness of my groaning, my bones cling to my flesh. I resemble a pelican in the wilderness. I have become like an owl of the waste places. I lie awake. I have become like a lonely bird on a housetop. Some of yours may say sparrow there. Sometimes we may feel like this. We may feel like a lonely sparrow. Maybe not important enough for God to take attention to. Maybe not important enough that nobody else sees. I mean, he goes on with this idea of mine enemies and those things, like many of the Psalms address, and these people had to face that more than we have to face that. But he comes around this in this Psalm by giving praise to God, saying, I know that you can bless me because you are forever. I know that you can bless me and you can bless my descendants because of who you are. And he even says in verse 18, this will be written for the generation to come, that a people yet to be created may praise the Lord. I love it that he stuck that verse in there. It's like he said it for us. I'm writing this down so that other people will praise you, so that other people who are yet to come, generations to come, will praise you. I'm writing this down. Because regardless of what you do in my life, I praise you for who you are. When we think of this idea of the sparrow and God's recognition of that, back just a few chapters back in Matthew, in chapter 6, it's in the midst of what we know as the Sermon on the Mount. He says this in verse 25. For this reason I say to you, do not be anxious for your life, as to what you shall eat or what you shall drink, nor for your body as to what you shall put on. Is not life more than food, and the body than clothing? Look at the birds of the air, that they do not sow, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth much more than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single cubit to his lifespan? And why are you anxious about clothing? Observe how the lilies of the field grow. They do not toil, nor do they spin. Yet I say to you that even Solomon in all his glory did not clothe himself like one of these. Jesus is doing the same thing here. He's saying, look at these things. Look at the birds. They're not worried about these things. God is providing for them. Look at the grass of the field. How beautiful are the flowers that come from that. This year, and I wasn't very successful because I just didn't clean out the weeds good enough in an area that we hadn't been mowing. And so we kind of, Radonna and Remington really worked hard to clean that area out. And I just kind of took the tiller over it just quickly. And Radonna had these boxes of wildflowers. Some of you have sown those before. We've done that before, and it's amazing what you get when you sow those things. Little bitty tiny seeds. But I went out there and sowed those, and if you go there now, some that looked like weeds before now have these delicate little flowers on them. Just some of them paper thin. Just absolutely beautiful. God did that. I mean, he did it to start with. He's made that. He's designed that. But if God, verse 30, so arrays the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, will he not much more do so for you, O men of little faith? Do not be anxious then, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or with what shall we clothe ourselves? For all these things the Gentiles eagerly seek, for your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Therefore do not be anxious for tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. This lesson may not be about you. I mean, we see the fear aspect. We see the context that Jesus says, look at the sparrows. Look at the birds. All these things, this idea of not being anxious and this idea of not fearing what can happen. I mean, Jesus was actually telling them what will happen. We see that context. And so, yes, there is an application to us, but maybe that's not the lesson that you need to get today. Maybe it's about other people. That's kind of strange coming from the preacher, isn't it? Usually we say, we don't listen to a sermon, don't listen to the Bible and just apply it to other people instead of applying it to yourself. But let's look at this from the perspective of what are other people worth? If Jesus is saying that you are more important than sparrows, and God notices a sparrow when that sparrow falls, what about the people that are around you? What about the people that you contact? Are they not too worth so much more? Does God not know what's happening with them and how we treat them? I mean, if God knows when a sparrow falls, if I take a BB gun and shoot a sparrow, I remember I said earlier I wasn't raised to just kill something for no reason, but I can remember doing it and just feeling absolutely horrible. And even knowing God saw that and never wanting to do that again. If God notices each sparrow when they fall, doesn't he see how we treat people? Doesn't he see whether we simply don't say anything, don't do anything? Therefore the passages, as much as you've not done it, unto the least of these, you've not done it to me. Matthew chapter 25. I mean, those people couldn't understand. When didn't we feed you? When did we see you and clothe you? When were you in prison and we didn't come see you? And Jesus says, when you didn't do it to those that were around you, you didn't do it to me. But likewise, the opposite was true. When you did it to them, you did it to me. You did it for me. So the worth of people, God's crown glory of creation. I mean, I've got to confess a little bit here. Yesterday, we decided, hey, this is our chance. We're going to go get away. We're going to go just get away and do something. And we love to go floating. So put the kayaks on top of the vehicle and headed off. Went to the river. We didn't even stop to think about a lesson that we had learned years ago, that it was a Saturday. It was hot. There's a lot of people go floating on a Saturday. So much so that the river that we went to, I mean, if we would have wanted to swim, I really don't think you could have. I mean, there was so many people. And it wasn't the idea so much that there was so many people, except for I love to enjoy nature. And we've gotten to float several times this year and just float when nobody else is around. And just thoroughly enjoy that. But not was it only a lot of people. These people weren't interested in enjoying nature at all. I don't know how they could enjoy much of anything. The amount of alcohol that was being consumed, the whole river, I mean, all the way down, that's all you could pretty much smell. The language that was coming out was I mean, it was just completely offensive to us. And of course, we've got Remington with us, and we're experiencing this. And it would be easy to get mad. And I found myself becoming cynical. I mean, echoing even to Radonna at one point. Lovely young lady. I mean, there was a lot of rafts, big rafts and rentals and stuff like that. Lovely young lady. Just as we were just kind of going by, and we had kayaks so we could maneuver and scoot on down the river as if we were going to get out of the crowds, but we never did. But she was completely sick into the river. And I was very cynical and uttered some words coming from Bill Cosby and I uttered them to Radonna, and I said, and they call that having fun. Those people need Jesus. They're God's creation. There's so many circumstances that we find ourselves in that in some way we can shine a light. And there are so many times that we fail to do that. The worth of a sparrow. To us, sometimes, they're not worth very much. Evidently, to God, they're worth something. The praise team wants to go ahead and come up. You guys can. So, how this applies, you decide. Do you need to hear this morning the importance of you? Jesus said those words in that context. So that's okay. You may need to hear this morning the importance of you. The importance that he knows what's happening with you. He knows what's going on in your life. He knows the things that you are lifting up to him. He knows what you need more than you know what you need. This morning, if you need to hear the importance of them. The other people that you associate with, the people that you're around, or the people that you just happen to pass. Whether it's the Muslim that's standing in the Walmart checkout lane, or whoever it is, the person on the creek. We can all take a lesson to this. And maybe we need both. I know I do. But if you need to respond to that today, we're going to stand and sing. And so if you need to respond to Christ, if you need to respond to this message in some special way, or you just need the prayers of the church, we're inviting you to come. Let's stand together and sing. We fall down, we lay around at the feet of Jesus. The greatness of your mercy and love at the feet of Jesus. We cry, holy, holy, holy. We cry, holy, holy, holy. We cry, holy, holy, holy is the Lamb. We fall down, we lay our crowns at the feet of Jesus. The greatness of the mercy and love at the feet of Jesus. We cry, holy, holy, holy. We cry, holy, holy, holy. We cry, holy, holy, holy is the Lamb. We cry, holy, holy, holy. We cry, holy, holy, holy. We cry, holy, holy, holy is the Lamb. Dan, do you want to be making your way up here? Let's be seated, please. Before we go into our time of communion, Dan Duche has a special that he's going to share with us. And I just wanted to mention this fact to you, is that this is a song that he wrote himself. So I look forward to hearing Dan share this with us today.